in Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, a high of 13 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm
/Helping Britain.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call Keir. Put your questions to the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, now. 0345 6060 973. This is LBC.
It is indeed, and it's 3 minutes after 9 on Monday, April the 3rd, and it is called Sir Keir. With a bit of a difference, Sir Keir is in position up in Hartlepool, where he will be meeting, I'm sure, voters of the electorate a little bit later, as he marks 3 years in the job. And as I've said already, the frustration that when he first took over, of course, with the COVID pandemic, but he joins me now. Good to have you on the line, Sir Keir. Thank you very much for taking the calls. Just a quick one to get you, good morning, sir, to reflect on the story that's leading the LBC News Bulletin. Political correctness has fuelled sexual exploitation of children. We'll hear later today from the Prime Minister. There will be measures that he will introduce, a task force led by the National Crime Agency, data analysis used to help the police to identify the types of criminals. Being involved in a gang was an aggravating factor. But I read in one newspaper, The Times, Labour says this is hopelessly inadequate, belated and narrow. Sir Keir, can you expand?
Yes, Nick, thank you for that. On child sexual exploitation, anything we can do to crack down on it, we should do. I worked on this for 5 years when I was Director of Public Prosecutions between 2008 and 2013, and saw too many of these cases, including I was the Director of Public Prosecutions that gave the green light to prosecute the Rochdale grooming case, which was the first of the sort of multi-defendant group grooming cases involving Pakistani men. And so anything we can do to crack down on these cases, I'm in favour of us doing. But I have to say just 2 or 3 things, Nick, if I may.
Sure.
Firstly, on this question of reporting, the duty to report, particularly if you're in a position where you see something going on, I called for that in 2013. 2013, that is 10 years ago, and this government's been in power now for 13 years. That is a decade lost, and I think the Prime Minister and others have to really explain why they've wasted that decade. The second thing is that it is right that ethnicity should not be a bar and political correctness should not get in the way of prosecutions. And I heard your discussion earlier on. There are examples which went wrong in the past, and we have to deal with that. But the vast majority of sexual abuse cases do not involve those of ethnic minorities. And so I'm all for clamping down on any kind of case. But if we're going to be serious, we've got to be honest about what the overlook is. And just one last thing, Nick, because it was really instructive for me. When my team in the Northwest came down to London to see me in Crown Prosecution Service headquarters, when they wanted the green light to prosecute the Rochdale grooming case, which was the first of these big grooming cases. And I looked at the file with them and I heard what they had to say, and I said, yes, we should go ahead with this prosecution. I think it was 12 or 13 Pakistani men in that case. But it came to my attention that one of the men that we were seeking to prosecute had previously been arrested and not charged a number of years before. So I said, yes, you can have permission to green light for this Rochdale grooming case, but I want to understand why this man wasn't prosecuted before. And then I looked at the file. I got them to pull out the file for me. I looked at the file, and what I found there was something which concerned me, because what I found was good faith police officers, good faith prosecutors who made assumptions about, in that particular case, quite young girls, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, if you recall. And the police and prosecutors had, in good faith, assumed that because these girls hadn't reported what was happening to them straight away to the police, because they'd gone back to the perpetrators in these grooming gangs, and because they themselves were involved in drinking and other related offences, that they would not be believed by a jury, therefore their case couldn't go forward. And so at the heart of that Rochdale case, I found a massive flaw in our criminal justice system, which was these assumptions about teenage girls and what they were likely to do, and frankly the likelihood of a teenage girl going straight to the police I thought was pretty low. So we set about changing the approach. It was really from that case onwards that we changed the approach. So I'm all, in terms of getting back to your question, if anything that can be done to bear down on child sexual exploitation, I'm up for that, but it needs an honest and robust discussion about what the real problems are underpinning this. And they've been there for a very, very long time. And, 13 years in power, and the government is sort of stumbling on some of the issues that, in my view, they should have confronted at least a decade ago.
Thanks for that, Sir Keir. Let's get to the first of the callers. It's Matthew in Heathrow. Your question to Keir Starmer. Go ahead, Matthew.
Hi, Matthew.
Oh, hi, Sir Keir. Do you actually support to open more safe and legal routes for refugees? And actually, do you support to use the use of UK military bases to house these refugees?
Matthew, just taking those 2 points. Firstly, on safe routes, yes, in the right circumstances, I do. So, for example, when the Taliban were closing in on people in Afghanistan who had been working for the British in the summer of 2021, we were desperately, through safe routes, trying to get them out. And some of my team in my office were helping get them out. These were people who'd been interpreters for our armed services out there. Some of them have been prosecutors, working, in fact, with some of the people that I was working with as prosecutors. And we were desperate to get them out. And if you remember, Matthew, there were those awful scenes where the last plane left and the Taliban were closing in, and not everybody had got out, and that was a real problem. So in the right circumstances, of course, there need to be safe routes, and I think everybody would agree with that. On the basis, which is a slightly different problem, Matthew, which is what do we do with the number of people that are here that are in limbo because they haven't had their cases processed? Well, we've got to find somewhere to house them, and I think that simply using more and more hotels is something which is unsatisfactory, and we need to find a better solution. The problem, Matthew, as I see it, is this, that the processing of the claims is nowhere near fast enough. And Matthew, if you can believe this, then, or you may know this, but of all the people that have arrived by small boats in the last year or so, only 1% have had their claims processed. That is unforgivable from the government. I want to stop small boats. I don't want anybody making that crossing across the channel. But to get that done, we need to crack down on the criminal gangs that are running this show, that are putting desperate people in a desperate situation. But we also need to process those claims a lot faster.
And just on the point, Matthew's point of using a base such as RAF Scampton, would you support that?
Well, the government's got to look at as many alternatives as it can, although I think it's going to run into this problem, Nick, that wherever it chooses, there will be a local reaction. And in the end, it's the symptom of the problem, because the problem is that the government is nowhere near fast enough in processing these claims.
I hear that, but there are tens of thousands of souls who do have to be housed. So £6.5 million a day is what I read the current cost. Would Labour support for the temporary use? And I hear what you say, expediting the process, which makes your figure of 1% is truly shocking. But in the meantime, using bases in Kent and Lincolnshire.
I think it's inevitable that we need to use temporary basis, Nick, but temporary and unsatisfactory, because the root problem is process the claims more quickly.
Matthew, thank you for your call. Keirthy is in Brighton. Keirthy, go ahead.
Hi, Keirthy.
Hi. My name's Keirthy, and I'm a junior doctor, and I have been for the last 14 years. I took part in last month's industrial action, and I intend to take part in next month's industrial action. And I wanted to know, if you do become the next government, will you commit to a full pay restoration for junior doctors?
Keirthy, firstly, thank you for what you do. Keirthy, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to make a commitment now about what we will do in government, because the election is probably, 12 months or so away, and we don't know the state of the economy. But I can tell you this, Keirthy, under a Labour government, you will recall, junior doctors and nurses were paid properly, and they didn't feel the need to go on strike. We didn't have any national strikes under the last Labour government, and so I can assure you that you will have a Labour government on your side.
But would that be including a 35% pay rise?
No, Nick, I'm not going to make that commitment, and I don't think anybody would expect me to do that a year out from an election, so I'm not going to do that.
Quick response from Keirthy. Keirthy, quick reply.
No, I understand where Sir Keir is coming from, and I think my only sort of plea is to understand that junior doctors apparently going through medical school sort of develop an enormous amount of debt. It's no longer a sensible career choice for many people to leave with £100,000 of debt after 6 years.
Yeah, Keith, I completely understand that. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is bring in reforms. I want more doctors and nurses, and we want double the number coming through the system. But we've also got to reform. And I'd encourage you and any of your colleagues to work with us on this, get in touch with us, because we need to, if we're going to ensure the NHS is fit for the next 75 years, then we've got to make sure that we reform it and look at those issues. So please work with us on that.
Do you mean contact your local MP or the parliamentary candidate when you say work? Is that what you're suggesting?
Parliamentary candidate or Nick, with your permission, we'll follow up directly and I'll get my office to be in touch.
Keithy, talk to one of my colleagues. And in a related story, in the last few minutes, your team probably haven't had time to pass this to you yet, Sir Keir. The National Education Union has announced that teachers in England have voted to reject the government's latest pay offer. 98% of those who voted against the deal. To remind my listeners, you'll know, Sir Keir, the offer was a one-off £1,000 payment for this year and a 4.5% pay rise for next year. Sir Keir, within the last few minutes, a reaction if I can?
Well, I'm disappointed because I want to see this resolved. Obviously, it's back round the negotiating table now, but I'd urge both sides to compromise and to come to an agreement as quickly as possible.
We're coming in, you don't need reminding of this with young children, we're coming in the run-up to exam season. Would you support teachers who now possibly take industrial action at these particularly key months?
Well, obviously I support their right to take industrial action. It's very important I say that. But I'll be clear, I don't want to see industrial action, and that's why I want the government around the table resolving this. It is possible to resolve these disputes, and the sooner the government gets on with that, the better.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go to more of your calls. Graham in Bushy. Graham, you're on the radio. Go ahead.
Morning, both of you.
Hello.
Hi, Graham.
So Keir, Rosie Duffield said recently that you haven't spoken to her since September 2021, despite being harassed and abused regularly by your own MPs and Labour Party members. Is this the correct way to treat a female Labour MP who has faced such continued abuse?
Well, Graham, I think that comment was a few weeks ago now, and I actually spoke to Rosie just the other week, and very open to talking to Rosie. Of course, she's an important voice in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and whether it's Rosie Duffield or anybody else, any discussion has to be had with tolerance and respect, and that's what I want and expect of the whole of my Parliamentary Labour Party.
There was a story on the weekend that Rosie Duffield, your colleague, was surprised you went to Kent, I would imagine in readiness for the local elections, and she says you chose not to meet with your only MP in Kent. Is that correct?
Nick, everywhere, obviously it's the local elections now, and therefore I'm across the country in a different place most days. What the practice we've got, it's straightforward, whether it's Kent or anywhere else, is you notify the MP in the constituency you're visiting, and that's what we do, and the local leaders, etc. That's absolutely standard practice. So, and I will talk to Rosie about this, and obviously see if there's any additional issues. But there was nothing unusual about that particular visit. As we go rushing around the country, we always contact the constituency MP, but not the county MPs. That's just standard practice.
Okay, so there's no snub in here in any way, shape or form?
No, and you know, I hope Rosie knows that I'm very happy to have a discussion anytime.
All right. Graham, thank you for your call. Sarah, appropriately enough, in Hartlepool. Go ahead, you're through to Sir Keir. Sarah, good morning to you.
Hi, Sarah.
Good morning.
I'm
Good
just
morning,
along the
Sir Keir.
coast from you, I think. I'm just off the high street.
You are.
It's a
well,
beautiful day.
I've seized my opportunity to ring in.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day here.
So at the moment we're seeing violence against women and girls being used as a bit of a political football. In Hartlepool in 2021, we actually saw a registered sex offender campaigning to be our MP.
Really?
And that kind of opened up a loophole basically in the law that registered sex offenders are allowed to be MPs. What will you do to protect women and girls in Parliament and in the public?
Sarah, hold hard. I'm just going to come back to you in a moment. This was Christopher Killick, who was on the ballot. He was a registered sex offender. This was the Hartlepool by-election. Shortly before the charge was heard, the Court of Appeal ruled in a case that filming someone in an intimate act without consent was always unlawful. This is what Killick was alleged to do. The decision not to prosecute him was then reassessed, and at a Stratford Magistrates Court hearing, Killick was ordered to pay the victim £5,000 in in compensation and put on the sexual offenders register for 5 years. This made national news, the victim speaking out how she campaigned for 5 years for justice. Mr Killick subsequently moved to Hartlepool, where he sought to stand for an MP. He secured just 248 votes in the subsequent by-election. That's the background to, Sarah, your question, because I'm not sure Sir Keir might have been aware of that, but I don't want to sort of ambush him, but he certainly is now. Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I wasn't aware of the particular details, but look, let me be clear. He shouldn't have been allowed to stand as an MP, and I'm glad that the people of Hartlepool roundly rejected him, and I'm not surprised about that. Sarah, on your wider point about violence against women and girls, this is a very, very serious issue. It's pernicious. It is much, much wider than most people think. And I spent a lot of time when I was Director of Public Prosecutions working with others to try to get to grips with violence against women and girls and bring more cases to justice. As you know, Sarah, one of the issues is that, you know, for every one woman that has the courage, and it does take huge courage to come forward, there's probably about 9 that have been subject to domestic violence or sexual violence that don't. So the first thing is we have to create conditions in which people can come forward. And I'm a big advocate of saying you don't necessarily need to go to a police station, because a lot of women won't want to do that. It's a very hard thing to relate what's happened to you in that formal setting. So other settings, up here in the North East, there was a scheme to have people talk at their workplace. And then when people do come forward, they need proper support and they need a prosecution that drives on. And one of the shocking things under this government, Sarah, is that of all the cases that come forward, so reported cases, so for every 100 women, it is predominantly women who come forward, only 1.6 cases, less than 2 of those cases get prosecuted under this government. That is shocking. And when I first heard it, I had to get my team to double check the figures for me because I could not believe it.
Sarah, thank you for that call. Jason in Marylebone. Jason, you're through to Sir Keir Starmer. Go ahead, Jason. Good morning to you.
Hi, Jason.
Good morning to you. Good morning to you both. Sir Keir, we're parallel opposites. I'm Spurs, you're Arsenal. you work for the CPF. Unfortunately, I ended up being prosecuted. But I like you, and I do believe you're probably going to be our next Prime Minister.
Thank you, Jason.
I need to ask you a question. The amount of reoffending that goes on from people that get released from prison is outrageous. And I want to know what you think you can do about that to try and make changes and to help ex-offenders go on the straight.
Yeah, Jason, 2 things. Firstly, for those in prison, we need much more work to stop reoffending. If you look at those reoffending rates for those coming out of prison, you can see that there's huge failure under this government to deal with reoffending. So we need to get to grips with that, Jason, within prison. I would also, Jason, I've long believed this, feel strongly that we need to put resource and power into our schools. I've always looked at this question of who's most likely to end up in prison. And the biggest indicator is children who begin to have problems at primary school and then children who get excluded at secondary school. And that's why under the last Labour government we had special mentors put in school to support those children and stop them going off the rails and ending up in prison. So I would do the bit, Jason, of, you know, what do you do with people coming out of prison? I think that's really important because we need to keep the public safe. But I've always been a strong advocate for catching young people before they fall, because that helps the young person whose life would otherwise go off the rails, but also the very many victims of that young person before he or she ends up in prison. So put your money, your resource, your decision-making into your schools. That's why Sure Start, the sort of things that the last Labour government were doing, were so important in relation to this. Thank you, Jason.
Jason, thank you. Let's stay with a couple of prison-related stories, if I can, Sir Keir. You will be aware that last week the decision was taken not to grant parole to Charles Bronson, supposedly the most violent prisoner currently held behind bars in the United Kingdom. Was that the right decision? What message does it send about the justice system?
I think it is the right decision, and I would fully support that. And I don't think it was a difficult decision in many respects.
Double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork, I remind you, he raped and murdered 2 schoolgirls in Leicestershire in the 1980s, 2 teenage schoolgirls, has his parole hearing shortly. Should he be recommended for release? Should it be in public?
I don't think he should be recommended for release. I don't know the circumstances as to whether that can be in public or not, Nick, but certainly I don't think he should be.
And lastly, Levi Belfield is trying to arrange so that he can have a wedding behind bars. This is being opposed by the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, who is trying to ensure that the party does not take place. Sir Keir?
I prosecuted Levi Belfield, so I have absolutely no sympathy with him whatsoever.
Candy and Thanet, you're through to Sir Keir. Go ahead, Candy.
Candy,
hi. Hello, Sir
Hi,
Keir
Candy.
Starmer. Hello there. Well, as you're aware, the NHS is being privatised by stealth, and this obviously means that CEOs and shareholders are getting bonuses and dividends that would otherwise go to patient care.
Are you in it, by the way? Candy, are you in the NHS, might I ask?
I am.
Okay.
I'm a registered nurse.
Go ahead,
yes,
just so I get your perspective. Go ahead with your question, thank you.
Okay, so it's really, is Sir Keir, well, he must be aware that the NHS is being privatised by stealth by this government. And so CEOs and shareholders are getting bonuses and dividends that would otherwise go to patient care. So would Sir Keir Starmer renationalise the NHS?
Candy, I don't believe in privatising our NHS.
And do you think it is being privatised by stealth, Sir Keir?
I am, there are bits of it, Nick, to be clear. I think that I would spend much less money on the CEOs that Candy rightly identifies and much more money on doctors and nurses. And that's why one of our major commitments is to get rid of the non-dom tax status, which gives super rich people the ability not to pay their tax here, and to use that money to double the number of medical students coming into doctors and nurses. But Candy, just to be clear, and for the record, Nick, where it is necessary to reduce our waiting lists to allow people to go or to refer people to the private sector, I do support that to get our waiting lists down. So, Candy, on the broad theme, I agree with you. I don't want a privatised health service. It should always be free at the point of need as well. I want more doctors and nurses, and I want to put our money and our resource there. But just so there's no lack of clarity, Candy, when it comes to just getting those waiting lists down, one of the levers we have to pull as a temporary measure, I think, is to allow the continuation of referrals to the private sector to get that done. I hope, Candy, that under a Labour government we can reform the NHS and we can have a health service which is a health service that doesn't make any difference whether it's the NHS or private, because the standard of care will be so high.
Candy, thank you. A couple of email questions, texts or tweets. Ken in Kent. We've had another nightmare down here with the port of Dover. If Labour came into power, what would Sir Keir do about it? Can he accept this is all down to Brexit? What does he say, Sir Keir?
Ken, I would plan. I think firstly, for the families trying to get out, I know it's slightly got better this morning, but I suspect Thursday may be bad again. The frustration, families who want well-earned holidays trying to get over the border out of Dover. We've had this before. We had exactly the same last summer, exactly the same last Easter, and a lack of planning. And of course Brexit has had an impact. There are more checks to be done. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm advocating reversal of Brexit. I'm not. I've always said there's no case now for going back in. But once we left, it was obvious that what had to happen at the border would change. Whichever way you voted, that was obvious. Whichever way you voted, you're entitled to have a government that recognises that and plans ahead. And yet again, we've got to the first big holiday of the year, and we've got queues, to the great frustration of many families trying to get out to have a well-earned holiday. And I think my message to the government, their message would be get a grip.
Ian in North London. Can Sir Keir clarify his position as regards Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party?
Ian, I think and hope that my position is very clear. Jeremy Corbyn will not stand as a Labour candidate at the next election. That's a decision of the Labour Party's National Executive Committee of 2 weeks ago now. So as we go into the next election, Jeremy Corbyn will not be a Labour candidate.
What's your personal relationship towards him, Sir Keir?
Oh, I haven't spoken to Jeremy Corbyn for 2.5 years now. So,
is he a friend? Was he a friend?
No, I mean, as I say, I haven't spoken to him for 2.5 years.
In 2020, he was a friend, Sir Keir.
Well, I worked with him, Nick, as you know. Let's just run through it. I didn't vote for him in 2015 when he stood as leader. I wanted him to stand down in 2016. He won again. I again didn't vote for him. But I did take the view that we needed an effective opposition and that I shouldn't just walk off the stage.
Right. But in January 2020, quotes, Jeremy Corbyn is a colleague. He's a friend. He's led us through some really difficult times in the Labour Party. Yeah, he's not a friend. He did,
because, Nick, very straightforwardly, tomorrow is the 3-year anniversary of me being leader. And the very first thing I said, Nick, when I became leader, is I would root out anti-Semitism by its roots. I apologised for what had happened. And I asked for those that had been most hurt by what had happened in relation to anti-Semitism simply to give me the space to show what I could do. I didn't think I could ask them for their support. I said, give me the space to show that I mean what I say. I meant what I said. And that is why Jeremy Corbyn lost the whip when he responded as he did to the terrible report on anti-Semitism that we had, and why he now won't stand as a Labour candidate.
And he was never a friend.
No, not in the sense that we were, went to visit each other or anything like that. I worked with him as a colleague, but as I say, I haven't spoken to Jeremy now for 2.5 years.
Joe's in Exeter. Joe, your question.
Good morning, Sir Keir.
Hi, Joe.
I just wondered if you would consider renationalising the water companies in order to save our beautiful rivers from pollution.
Joe, I think it's one of the things I've looked at is water nationalisation, because I think for many people there's a deep concern about what's happening with water, not just the prices, but also in relation to pollution into our rivers and into our beaches. Joe, that renationalising water costs a lot of money, and at the moment the economy is badly damaged, and I'm conscious that if we have the privilege of coming into government, and I know we've got to earn every vote if we get that far, we've got to be very careful what we spend our available money on. And there are difficult choices to be made, Joe. Do we spend our money on the next generation of doctors and nurses coming through, or do we spend it on water nationalisation? And in the current circumstances, my priority would be to spend it on the next generation of doctors and nurses.
Despite the water, of course, being extraordinarily high and the quality being lamentable in many places.
Oh, it's got to be improved. I completely agree with that, Nick. The quality, the price, and what's happening with sewage.
Yes.
This government's turned our rivers and our coastlines into open sewers, and that is disgusting for many, many people.
Joe, thank you. John in Hornchurch. John, you're through to Keir Starmer. Go ahead, John.
Hi, John.
How you doing? Keir, obviously, last week the report came in regards to children as young as 8 being strip searched by the police. I've got a twofold question. One, as Prime Minister, what are you going to do about this, and what steps do you take to eradicate this, for me, this form of child abuse? And two, how do you re-engage with the black community, because it's their children that are being negatively targeted by the actions by the police? So what would you do as Prime Minister?
John, look, I'm not in favour of strip searching children as young as 8, save in highly exceptional circumstances, of which I can't think what they would be, to be honest, at the moment, John. And in relation to your second community, we have to restore faith in all communities, including the black community, in policing. And one of the problems, I think, of the last few years is that confidence in policing has gone down, not up. And so, John, what I said, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, is that under the next Labour government there will be missions, which is purposes, and we've got 5 of them. One is safe streets, and that includes driving up confidence in the police, because in the end that is crucial. And for that to happen, John, I think we need more neighbourhood police officers. We need more police officers who are known to their communities, know their patch and are known by their patch, to build up that confidence. But you're right to point out that it needs hard work.
Senior officers might suggest, Sir Keir, sadly, that drug dealers and others will hide, in some instances, drugs. It's even suggested in some instances weapons in or around the bodies of children, sometimes under babies in prams. I'm sure you're aware of that.
No, I am aware of that, Nick, and I've also been, for myself, to go outside the school gates of primary schools to see some of the carnage, the littering and the obvious stuff and paraphernalia that goes with drug dealing. It is shocking to see outside of a primary school. And in order to crack down on that, I think we need a separate offence of grooming a child to go into drugs or gang-related activity. At the moment, we've just got a clumsy way of trying to see whether there's some other offence. Make it a criminal offence and clamp down on it, because it is shocking what happens with young children. And we need to protect them and everybody that might be affected by their behaviour as they grow up.
All right, last couple of questions from me as we come to the end of our time together. Do we have a start date for Sue Gray, your new Chief of Staff, yet?
Nick, we don't, because there's a committee that has to clear whether she can come and work for me or not. They're doing their work, and I obviously have to wait until they've made their decision.
OK. Won't be before the locals then, will it?
No, well, I don't know, but I think it's unlikely. We're in full swing now.
And an interview in yesterday's Sunday Times, which seems to have had its origin in a conversation you and I had in March last year, which is over whether a woman or not can have a penis, to which you said for 99.9% of women it's completely biological, and of course they haven't got a penis. This, of course, can be interpreted that 1 in 1,000 women do have a penis. Do we need to clarify that comment,
Nick, no, we don't need to do that. What I was trying, Nick, to create some sort of common sense frameworks to the discussion that we inevitably have by just starting with the common sense proposition that, for the vast majority, let's say 99.9%, but biology matters. Women have won many rights, smashed glass ceilings, won on equality and discrimination, and we can't roll any of that back. And in fact, there are more battles to be had for women. But Nick, there are, as I've said to you before, there are a small minority of people
but not
who
1 in
do
1,000, Keir.
Sorry, well, I mean, Nick, 99.9 was just the general sense, the vast majority. You can put whatever description you like on it, but there are, vast majority of women. This is biological. It's very straightforward. We must never roll back women's rights. But I'm not prepared to ignore the fact, and I know you don't either, Nick, that there are a small number of
but
people
nothing
who
like as
do.
high as that, Sir Keir.
Nick, I'm not quarrelling with you on the numbers. I wasn't meaning to make a particular
But when a
statistical point.
transgender campaigner says Sir Keir needs to climb down off the fence if he's to win a general election, that's Debbie Hayton, how would you respond?
Well, Nick, what I'd say is I'm trying to set out a common sense, respectable, tolerant position in which we can advance a key debate. But the other thing, Nick, I'd say is this, and I don't know what proportion of your listeners call in on this, but as we go around the country campaigning, I talk to thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and they want to talk to me about the cost of living crisis. They want to talk to me about the fact they can't pay their bills. They want to know what they're going to do about their council tax. Almost nobody is talking about trans issues. And I do sometimes just wonder why on earth we spend so much of our time discussing something which doesn't actually, isn't a feature of the dinner table or the kitchen table or the cafe table or the bar.
OK, final question, nothing to do with that if you've time. Mike in Cheshunt, can you put it in one sentence if you would, Mike, please? Go ahead.
Hi, Mike.
Morning, Sir Keir. Will you commit to putting in the Labour Party election manifesto you will scrap dangerous all-lane running smart motorways and reinstate hard shoulders?
Thank you, sir. I'm obliged to you for doing it in a sentence. Sir Keir.
Mick, we've already said it should pause. I think all of the safety issues are so concerning.
Pause isn't scrap, of course, Sir Keir.
No, it isn't, but I think pause in the sense of we can't go on like this, Nick. You've long championed this, and Mick as well. We've seen the safety problems with these schemes, so we need to look again at them, in my view.
Enjoy the sunshine of Hartlepool and Seaton Carew. Good luck with your campaigning. Sir Keir Starmer from Labour. Thank you, Sir Keir, for your time. And congratulations, 3 years. What's your standout memory of the last 3 years, Keir?
Oh, turning the Labour Party around and the fact that it's a credible alternative. And Nick, when I started 3 years ago, we were 25 points behind in the polls, and you and others challenged me as to this was an impossible task. People shook me by the hand when I became leader and said, good luck. In the next breath, they said, you'll never do it within 5 years. Now they tend to say, why aren't you further ahead? So if nothing else, I think we've made progress.
You couldn't take over Leicester City for me, could you? That's the that's the latest.
I'm nervous enough watching Arsenal every week.
All right. Hey, have a good day out there. Thanks for your time. Sir Keir Starmer appearing here on LBC 9:35. Let's get the latest news headlines.
Sir Keir Starmer's told Nick the government has wasted a decade by failing to do more to fight child abuse. The Labour leader says it's right that political correctness must not be allowed to get in the way of prosecuting grooming gangs. Rishi Sunak is due to set out his plans to tackle the issue later. Schools in England are facing further strike action after